Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Black Lives Matter formally siding with Cuban dictators. Black Lives Matter condemns the U.S. federal government's inhumane treatment of Cubans and urges it to immediately lift the economic embargo. This cruel and inhumane policy, instituted with the explicit intention of destabilizing the country and undermining Cubans' right to choose their own government, is at the heart of Cuba's current crisis. Since 1962, the United States has forced pain and suffering on the people of Cuba by cutting off food, medicine, and supplies, costing the tiny island an estimated $130 billion. Without that money, it's harder for Cuba to acquire medical equipment needed to develop its own COVID-19 vaccines and equipment for food production. This comes in spite of the country's strong medical care and history of lending doctors and nurses to disasters around the world. It's a wonderful statement by Black Lives Matter because it's an indication of their understanding not just of the history of Cuba, but the history of America. So when you think about the 1619 Project, that ahistorical account of America, think of this current statement from Black Lives Matter on Cuba, because it's the sort of rewriting of the history that's going on by these neo-Marxists. Well, this prompted, the Black Lives Matter statement prompted rebukes on editorial pages, and also this black Cuban gentleman to take to TikTok to offer this response.
Directly to Black Lives Matter movement. You guys suck. You know why? You know why you guys suck? Because any of you guys live in the communist country, in the socialist country. The day you guys go to Cuba, and live for a month, at least, then you guys can talk about Cuba. Then you guys can talk about Cubans. Cuba is not a paradise. Cuba is not like a pretty island. It's not. Cuba is a dictatorship country. Cuba is a dictatorship government. People are protesting right now in Cuba. They're not protesting because they want the embargo to be off. No. They're protesting because they want to be free. They're protesting in Cuba because they want a freedom. That's why they're protesting. The day that the Cuban people have freedom, the embargo disappears. Any restriction that the United States have over Cuba are gonna disappear. I see, like that. When the people in Cuba have freedom. In Cuba you cannot speak, you cannot think. Thinking in Cuba take you to jail. Speaking in Cuba take you to jail. In order that has to be with embargo.
Well, to help adjudicate this debate between Black Lives Matter and that Cuban gentleman, pleased to be joined for our weekly confab with Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation and author of the recently released Brutal War, Jungle Fighting in Papua New Guinea, 1942. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Who's right?
Well, look, a number of the statements in the Black Lives Matter manifesto are just factually incorrect. The U.S. doesn't sanction or prevent medical or food aid from going to Cuba. That's just not true. Also, the Cuban government said they were making their own vaccine. They didn't want foreign help. They produced very little, and it doesn't appear to work. I mean, and there's no mention whatsoever of the large financial reserves of the Cuban government, or the fact that they have a very ambitious foreign policy, which includes not just sending doctors, but security forces and all throughout the region, meddling and destabilizing other countries, propping up the Maduro regime in Venezuela, all resources that they could have used to take care of the Cuban people. And there's like no mention. When all the sanctions were lifted under Obama, the regime did nothing. This is just like when we had the deal with Iran. We said, well, they're going to liberalize, they're going to get better, they're going to be a nice neighbor, they're going to treat their people better. They did none of that, and the Cubans did none of that as well. I mean, the reality is I'm sure Black Lives Matter people that wrote this know this. The government controls everything in Cuba, in the public and the private sector. Any money that goes in the country flows through their fingers. They're incredibly corrupt. They siphon off what they need. They decide who gets the rest. So when you put money into that country, all it does is it makes the government stronger.
Well, do you think, I mean, Russia was the first country to provide aid in Cuba after 3 hurricanes, in 2008. Do you think that they're going to be coming in to help Cubans with vaccinations?
Well, the Russian Sputnik vaccine's actually not bad. The Chinese vaccine's kind of worthless, but the Chinese and the Russians will both help prop up the government because they see that as a base in the Western Hemisphere to diminish American power, and that's why it's survived all these years. Cuba is going to be a bigger issue for us because the reality is that since they took the missiles out after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Cubans have been annoying, but they've never really been a problem. And the reason why they never really a problem is because, by and large, the Atlantic region, from the Arctic to the Antarctic, Africa to Latin America, the Caribbean, it was our backyard, and nobody messed with us in our backyard very much. And they were like the annoying neighbors that play their music loud at night. That's changing. You have the Chinese massively intruding into the Western Hemisphere in a very destabilizing way. You still have the Russians messing around. You even have the Iranians messing around in Venezuela. So with having a strong base in the middle of the Western Hemisphere is actually becoming kind of a strategic threat to the United States. Not to mention, they treat their people horribly. I mean, look, this thing's gone on for decades. And you have people in Cuba who have only grown up under this system. And yet they spontaneously walk out into the streets and say, we hate this government. Mm-hmm. What does that tell you?
What should our government be doing in addition to preparing itself for the UN investigation into human rights violations in America? With respect to Cuba, one of the suggestions, this was offered by the Wall Street Journal editorial board, is repressive regimes, when there's unrest, the first thing they do is shut down channels of communication, particularly in the digital age. And one thing the Biden administration could do is circumvent the cyber wall that Cuba is putting up that prevents communications on social media and so forth, and provide avenues of communication.
Well, we could do that. It's not going to make a huge difference. I think it would be an important symbolic act of resistance and support for the Cuban people. But the reality is internet's very expensive in Cuba. It's not widely proliferated. It's not how everyday people communicate. The reality is the American radio that was broadcasted into Cuba was far more effective.
Let's move to China for a minute, but China as it relates to the Biden administration, particularly Hunter Biden. Peter Schweitzer, author of Secret Empires and Clinton Cash, was on with Maria Bartiromo yesterday talking about this novel approach to Hunter Biden's foray into the art world. The curator who's pitching his art the world over wants to break into foreign markets, and he sees Hunter Biden's blow art as his real opportunity to do so. This was the concerns that Peter Schweitzer raised in response to questioning from Maria Bartiromo.
Peter, right now, Hunter is getting ready to sell art. He has told us that this is his new job. He is a first-time artist, no training, of course. The pieces are being priced between $75,000 and $500,000 a piece. You called this scheme genius. Why?
Well, it's genius because in a very corrupt way, because what was the criticism of Hunter's previous money-making schemes? When he went to work for Burisma, the energy company, the criticism was he was getting $1 million a year. He had no background in Ukrainian energy regulation, no background in energy. Well, art is different than the business world. It's entirely subjective. So if somebody's prepared to send $500,000 to an artist for a piece of art, who can question it? So in that sense, it's very genius. But this opens the gateway to massive corruption, Maria, because the art owner, the art partner that he has that's going to be marketing his art has been very clear that he's going to market these things overseas. He's been wanting to break into the Chinese art market for years. And the Senate actually in 2019 issued a report talking about how the art world is rife with money laundering and corruption involving foreign oligarchs because it's so hard to trace. So it's a massively troublesome problem, and their explanations simply don't carry any weight.
Jim, do you think that Biden's art should be shared with the world? I mean, we shouldn't be allowed to just hoard it all for ourselves in America, should we?
Well, sure. Look, I mean, this is a free enterprise system, so he should be able to do whatever he wants. I don't think the U.S. government should be brokering or playing a role. I think anything the U.S. government does do, it should be completely transparent. Look, I think this is a clear example where the Biden administration would not be having these problems if they and the mainstream media had allowed the system to work like it's supposed to be. Like, air out their dirty laundry. Don't censor. Don't say there's nothing here. Get it out there, fully investigate it, and let everybody know what's going on, and then voters will make their own decisions. So, in a sense, they asked for this scandal. They asked for this scandal because they tried to say there's nothing to see here, and you can't look at this. You know, just like the Como brothers and other things, you know, eventually people are going to need to get to the facts and get to the information. And hiding it always comes back to hurt you. And they get what they deserve here. And this is a ridiculous. Well, the whole art thing is ridiculous. But the fact that it's mired the government is in this administration, it's their own fault, and it's the media's fault for not doing their job at the front end.
And Schweitzer went on to say, you know, at least the Clintons with the Clinton Foundation, they disclosed who their donors were, so you could have the conversation about, gosh, it's curious that these foreign countries are donating so much money to Hillary Clinton in advance of her presidential campaign, some of these speaking fees at big banks and so forth. At least that was disclosed, so you had to stand and deliver on the topic. What we're talking about here is, you know, we're going to protect the anonymity of the donors for some unidentified reason.
First of all, that's just nonsense.
Or purchasers.
Like a donor, because they're saying, well, we don't know who gave the money, therefore nobody could benefit from this. Like, nothing prevents the donor from telling them that they paid for this stuff. I mean, it's just nonsense that somehow this is insulating them from political influence. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I know, because they could be paying to get access to President Biden.
You know,
right, exactly.
You know,
and
like
they
were with
we don't know who gave the money.
Right, exactly.
Somebody will just say, well, I gave the money to Yahoo. I mean, come on.
Yeah, but I mean, especially when there's a track record, not just, I mean, forget Burisma, which everyone focuses on. How about with Chinese communists and Rosamond Seneca Partners and the $1 billion infusion into that private equity concern? I mean, so all of those questions remain effectively unanswered, and now you have them layering on another scheme.
Well, look, I didn't have problems going. They went after Trump, fine, and they went after him for years, and you know, in the end, they found nothing, and none of those, I believe, were the reason that Trump lost the election, because I think they, you know, everybody looked and there was no fire beyond the smoke. What the Biden team did is they hid all this from the public eye, and the mainstream media colluded with them to do that. I mean, they're complaining about misinformation. They're saying people should, and this is exactly what they were doing. And I actually think it was stupid. It was stupid on their part because you can't hide this stuff forever. Eventually, it's going to come out. And if there's real wrongdoing there and real illegal activity, you know, like Epstein, somebody's going to catch up with you sooner or later, my friend.
I wanted to get to your reaction to something we talked about on Friday, but we hadn't had a chance to talk to you about it. Your reaction to something I referenced before, Secretary of State Blinken's invitation to the UN to investigate the U.S. for human rights abuses. Jen Psaki summarizing last week.
As the Secretary said in his statement, he believes responsible nations must not shrink from scrutiny of their human rights record. Rather, they should acknowledge it with the intent to improve it, and also push and lift up and shine a light on other countries that need to do better. And that is the role we're playing here from the United States.
Jim?
Yeah, so this is either, well, look, this is just malfeasance. I could say this is a rookie mistake or, you know, a sophomore slump or something, but Blinken's an experienced diplomat who knows better. The reality is these UN groups, you know, beat on the U.S. as part of a political agenda. There's no sense of proportionality here. I mean, the scarce resources that we have in the world to do this, you think we would use that to investigate regimes that are doing brutal, irresponsible activity. But instead, they come after the U.S. because it's politically attractive for them. He knows that. They've done it before. and just allowing them to do it again doesn't make the U.S. look better or morally superior. It's literally, letting the other guy, throw pitches and having the batter bat with his eyes closed. It's just stupid. I've used the word stupid about 14 times in this interview. It's only been 5 minutes long, but it's
Stupid.
It's just the dumbest, most amateur diplomacy. And what's scary is it's coming from a very experienced diplomat who knows way better, because they did this under Obama and it never turned out well for the U.S.
Well, I think it's scary. Not that the UN and various adversaries of the United States think it's advantageous to do this politically, that the Biden administration thinks it's advantageous to do this politically.
Oh, it's just crazy. Look, people said, look, I was watching this movie last night, The Flyboys. You remember the Zeppelins?
Yeah.
You remember the Hindenburg?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This is the Biden administration. It's just like they're going down in flames between open borders and this ridiculous scandal with Biden, and the way they botched up opposing voter rights, and this really stupid move with the UN. It's like how many ways can give the American people to hate this government? It's like, do they sit around and say, what can we do to make everyday Americans more angry at us?
Yeah, no. Let's mask the vaccinated, too.
Well, they may be going down in flames, but the question is, who are they taking with them? This report on the fighting culture of the United States Navy surface fleet that was conducted at the direction of Senator Tom Cotton and a few members of Congress, including Dan Crenshaw and Mike Gallagher. Issues raised: insufficient leadership focus on warfighting, paralyzing zero defect mentality, underinvestment in surface warfare officer training, and so forth. I'm sure you're apprised of this. And what does it say? One of the accomplishments of the Trump administration, out by Trump, was getting the U.S. military back to military readiness. And this report seems to indicate the Navy's not there.
So this is, reminds me so much of the Carter years in the 1970s with the howling out of the military. I'm very concerned about this, with a whole bunch of other things, from woke policies to transgender policies. All these things really distracting the military. And I actually wrote this up the other day, and I sent it out to a email loop on one with a bunch of military people. And I cannot tell you how many people came back to me and said, this is exactly what's going on. So in the ranks of the military, there's real concern about this. I really am worried that if this continues for a couple of years, that we are undermining the efficiency, capability of the military the way we did in the 1970s. I take this as a really, really serious problem.
Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, VP of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation and author of Brutal War, Jungle Fighting in Papua New Guinea, 1942. Thanks as always, Jim.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Uncle Ryan is going to talk about how hot cash out refinances are. That sounds fun.
I sound like a broken record. I've been doing this for 18 years. I have never seen a market like this in my life. Home values have generally been skyrocketing the last couple of years. And with interest rates being so low, I've actually